My father, a violent man, conditioned me to spy on my mother so he could punish her. And if I ever refused or failed to follow his orders, he would turn his discipline onto me. This unbearable pressure finally shattered me, and I contacted Child Protective Services. But my father deceived them with lies and escaped consequences. And now he knows I tried to have him imprisoned. I have no idea what he might do to me next. When I was 5, my mother accidentally burned my food. A grilled cheese sandwich, my favorite. I instantly broke down sobbing. Suddenly I heard my dad's heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs. Fear flooded my mother's eyes, and she clamped her hand over my mouth to silence me, but this only made me wail louder. "Son, go to your room," my dad commanded, his voice icy and unyielding. The moment I closed my door behind me, the shouting began. "I married a worthless woman who can't even cook our son a damn meal." My blood froze. Then came the sound, like my mother's body hitting the floor. I rushed out instinctively and saw the skin around her eyes swollen grotesquely. I dropped to my knees, clutching her, trying to soothe her. But my father's voice cut through. "Son, don't comfort this witch. She earned this." I tried to ignore him and hold her tighter, but I stopped when he threatened to beat me too. From that day, my father groomed me to report my mother's every flaw. Any speck of dust left uncleaned, any minute she was late picking me up. He claimed it was to help her improve, and for our family's good. But when I resisted, he began savagely beating me whenever I stayed silent. Most of my childhood was spent as a surveillance tool. Occasionally, I'd whisper to my mom that I'd hide her mistakes, but she'd react fiercely. "No, do what your father tells you," she'd insist, her tone sharp and unflinching. For years, I believed abuse was normal, just part of family life. Then, one day at my friend's house, the first friend I'd made with parents still together, we ate in the kitchen with his family. I bit into the hamburger his mother cooked and noticed the bun was badly charred. "This is burnt," I blurted out reflexively. I braced for his dad to hurl his mom across the room or slap her. Instead, his dad just chuckled. "She always does that," he grinned. My friend nodded. His mother laughed, hiding her face playfully in her hands. Meanwhile, I sat rigid, waiting for violence that never came. As I left, both parents kissed me goodbye. Walking home, my mind reeled. When I opened my front door, it felt like stepping into another universe, light years from the home I'd just left. My mother lay curled on the marble floor, forehead bleeding, weeping violently. Hearing my dad snoring upstairs, I knelt beside her. She tried shoving me away, but I hissed, "Shut up. Let me clean your wounds." "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, Mom. I love you," I whispered. She didn't speak, just clutched my arms desperately, nodding through tears. The next morning, I was done. I woke up resolved to betray my parents in the most extreme way possible. After school, I didn't go home. I walked into the police station. Uncertain about the proper procedures or how to begin, I impulsively poured out the entire story in one frantic rush. I described the physical violence, the psychological manipulation, the relentless emotional abuse. The policewoman's expression grew deeply troubled, and she assured me she would summon a social worker for an urgent home inspection. After waiting for an hour, the social worker arrived at the station and informed me she would visit our house that same evening. She warned me directly that it was highly probable my parents would deduce I had reported them. That statement made my heart lurch violently. Yet she followed this with a pledge. Immediately after the home assessment, she would arrange emergency relocation for both my mother and me. Overwhelmed with gratitude, I instinctively embraced her before heading home, an unfamiliar smile on my face. True to her word, at precisely 9 p.m., a knock echoed at our door. My mother opened it, anticipating a relative. Instantly, the social worker confronted a woman, visibly covered in bruises and sporting a blackened eye. I observed everything silently from the corner of the living room. Once my mother grasped the situation, her face drained to a ghostly white and she urgently called my father downstairs. Though I couldn't hear the full exchange, within mere minutes, the social worker offered an apology for disturbing us and departed. I knew my father had deceived her. I attempted to sprint upstairs to my room, but I wasn't fast enough. My father intercepted my footsteps and seized me. "If you thought what I did to your mother was severe," he snarled, "you should witness how my father taught me to deal with snitches." I will spare the specifics of what transpired afterward. My only memory is awakening the next morning on my bedroom floor, every part of my body screaming in pain. My mother had tended to my injuries while I was unconscious. She perched on the edge of my bed, her eyes utterly hollow. In a fragile whisper, she apologized but insisted I understand we could never confide in anyone again. My father had persuaded the social worker that my mother's wounds resulted from a car accident and that I was a disturbed child fabricating tales for attention. Uh, School felt torturous that day. Merely sitting at my desk made me wince in pain. My teacher, Mrs. Cal, noticed my discomfort and inquired if I was all right. I simply nodded and claimed I'd fallen off my bicycle. The falsehood slipped out effortlessly. I'd been perfecting such lies for years. After school, I declined Jacob's invitation to his house, paralyzed by the fear my father might discover it. That evening, during dinner, my father behaved as though nothing had occurred. He discussed his workday, asked about my homework, utterly normal. But then he fixed me with a smile that churned my stomach. "Son," he announced, "I believe we require a new system here. Your mother evidently needs greater assistance than I realized." He decreed that henceforth, I must report every single error my mother made. If I overlooked anything, punishment would fall on both of us. The ensuing weeks descended into pure nightmare. I transformed into his miniature surveillance camera, monitoring my mother's every action. If she lingered too long at the grocery store, I was compelled to inform him. If dinner wasn't precisely ready at 6 o'clock, I had to tell him. If she spoke too long on the phone with her sister, I was forced to report it. Most devastatingly, my mother began monitoring me too. She'd anxiously remind me to disclose things to my father, petrified that if I forgot, we'd both suffer the consequences. One day at school, I finally shattered, collapsing into uncontrollable sobs inside a bathroom stall. A boy named Hugo, who'd transferred in a month prior, discovered me there. He didn't probe for explanations, just sat silently beside me until my breathing steadied. After that, we started spending lunchtimes together. He chatted about video games and movies, ordinary, comforting distractions that briefly let me escape the reality of home. One day, Hugo noticed the bruises on my arms when my sleeve accidentally slid upward. I hastily yanked it back down, but he'd already glimpsed them. He didn't mention it immediately, yet the very next day he brought me an extra sandwich his mother had prepared. The day after that, he gifted me an interesting rock he'd discovered. These were small gestures, but they carried immeasurable weight for me. Roughly a month after befriending Hugo, I finally confided a tiny fragment about my home life. Not the full truth, just that my father occasionally became enraged. Hugo didn't react with the shock I'd braced for. He simply listened, then shared that his cousin had faced a similar ordeal and eventually found assistance. That conversation marked the first moment I dared to believe an escape might exist. I began lingering longer with Hugo at school, fabricating excuses about study sessions that weren't real. Initially, my father grew suspicious, but when my academic performance improved, his vigilance relaxed slightly. Those fleeting pockets of freedom became my oxygen. Hugo transformed into my lifeline, the solitary person aware of even a sliver of my reality. Yet I knew I was navigating a perilous edge. My father's surveillance was omnipresent. He'd appear unannounced at school to monitor who I spoke with. He'd interrogate me about every minute of my day. And at home, the watchful torment persisted. My mother and I remained ensnared in this twisted game, each desperately trying to shield the other while knowing true protection was impossible. One afternoon following classes, Hugo asked if I wanted to visit his home. I froze. I hadn't accepted an invitation to anyone's house since Jacob's, an experience that had irrevocably altered everything. I concocted an excuse about needing to assist my mother with chores. Hugo looked visibly disappointed but didn't press further. His gaze held mine for an extended second, as though deciphering my unspoken words, before he shrugged and walked away. Arriving home, I found my father stationed by the entrance. "You're 7 minutes late," he stated, tapping his watch. My stomach plummeted like lead. I explained truthfully for once. A teacher had detained the class. He scrutinized me for an eternity, his frigid eyes dissecting my expression before finally nodding. "Go inform your mother dinner better be ready in 20 minutes. His unnervingly calm tone amplified the dread. In the kitchen, my mother was frantically chopping vegetables. Her trembling hands made the knife slip perilously close to her fingers with every motion. I whispered Dad's 20-minute ultimatum. She merely nodded, avoiding eye contact. I spotted a fresh bruise blooming purple and yellow on her pale wrist, but stayed silent. What good would mentioning it do? Instead, I began setting the table, attempting to help covertly. The clatter of each plate against the wood echoed thunderously in the mute kitchen. That night in bed, I revisited Hugo's invitation. A fragile part of me yearned to go, to witness normalcy again, to exist in a living room without policing every word and gesture. But a far larger part was paralyzed by the terror of my father's discovery. After the social worker debacle, he'd explicitly warned that any cry for help would doom both my mother and me. The scars were still there to validate his threat. At breakfast the next morning, my father declared he'd be home early. "I want to hear about your day, son. Every detail." His delivery made my skin prickle as if insects crawled up my spine. I nodded, fixing my gaze on my cereal, watching the flakes slowly dissolve into the milk. When my mother accidentally dropped a spoon, we both flinched at the jarring clang. My father merely smiled, taking a deliberate sip of his coffee. School that day dissolved into haze. Hugo enthusiastically described a new video game, his hands animatedly illustrating the graphics and mechanics, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind was wholly consumed by the impending reckoning awaiting me at home. During lunch, Hugo finally picked up on my distress. "Dude, you okay? You haven't said like 2 words all day," he observed, sliding his chocolate milk toward me as a peace offering. I shrugged and mumbled something unconvincing about fatigue. Hugo wasn't fooled. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a whisper. "Is it your dad again?" My head whipped around instinctively, scanning for eavesdroppers. The cafeteria buzzed with shouting and laughter, but you could never be certain who might overhear. "Just drop it, okay?" I snapped, harsher than intended. Hugo flinched, shoulders slumping, and immediate guilt washed over me. He was my only friend. "Sorry," I muttered. "Just not a good day." I picked listlessly at my sandwich, appetite gone. After school, I rushed home, arriving exactly on time. My dad sat waiting in the living room. He patted the leather couch beside him, its surface creaking under his palm. "Tell me about your day, son." I mechanically recited my classes, lessons learned, homework assigned, mundane details. Then came the expected probe. "Who'd you talk to?" I named a few classmates, deliberately omitting Hugo's name. An instinct screamed to keep Hugo hidden, one sanctuary untouched by my father's control. "Any new friends?" he pressed, eyes drilling into mine. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. "Not really," I feigned nonchalance. "Just the usual kids." I picked at a loose thread on my jeans, hoping I looked bored, not petrified. He nodded slowly, skepticism radiating from him. "Your mother tells me you've mentioned someone named Hugo." My blood froze. I'd forgotten confiding in Mom about Hugo weeks ago during a rare, unsupervised moment. She'd reported it, as the rules demanded. "Oh yeah," I said too quickly. "He's new. We worked on a project." I downplayed it, masking that Hugo was the only one who saw my pain. My dad leaned back, dissecting my expression. "Invite him over sometime. I'd like to meet your friends." His smile was a cold, lifeless mask. The idea of Hugo entering our house filled me with dread. "He's really busy with sports and stuff," I lied. "Maybe sometime, though." I held my breath, praying he'd relent. He dropped it, but I knew better. My father's memory was a steel trap, snapping shut on every lie, every secret. That weekend, I cleaned the garage as punishment for failing to report Mom's 10 extra minutes on the phone with her sister. My arms screamed from moving boxes. Dust coated my throat. My dad emerged holding 2 beers, handing one to me. I was 12. I'd never tasted alcohol. The bottle felt alien and cold. "Drink," he commanded. No request. Refusal was unthinkable. I sipped and nearly gagged, bitter, sour, revolting. He laughed, the sound echoing off the garage walls. "Your grandfather gave me my first beer at your age," he said, taking a long pull from his bottle. "Told me it'd put hair on my chest, make me a man." His cold eyes locked onto mine. "You want to be a man, don't you?" I nodded, forcing another sip down. My dad smiled, momentarily satisfied. "Men take care of their families," he continued. "They make sure everyone follows the rules. That's what I'm teaching you." His heavy hand clamped my shoulder, squeezing until pain flared. I kept nodding, nauseous from the beer and his words. He ranted about Mom needing a firm hand, how women were naturally disorganized and emotional, how lucky she was to have him, how lucky I was to have such a father teaching me these important lessons. I stared at the oil-stained concrete floor, watching a small spider vanish into a crack, wishing desperately I could disappear just as easily. By Monday, I was unraveling. Sleep was impossible, food repulsive. The beer had made me physically ill, but the fear was a far deeper sickness. Hugo noticed my state immediately, his eyebrows knitting together in concern. During gym class, he saw the fresh bruises scattered across my back as I changed shirts, dark purple smudges where my father had slammed me against the wall. This time, he didn't stay silent. "Dude, what the hell happened to you?" he whispered, his eyes wide with horrified disbelief. I yanked my shirt down, the fabric catching painfully on my still tender skin. Fell down the stairs, I mumbled, the same worn-out lie I'd used for years. The words felt hollow, rehearsed, pathetic. Hugo shook his head firmly. That's not from falling downstairs. My cousin used to say the same thing, but it was her stepdad hitting her. His voice was low but intense, his eyes darting nervously to ensure no one overheard. Panic surged through my chest, tightening like a vice around my lungs. Just drop it, okay? It's not like that. I slammed my locker shut, the metallic clang startling us both. But Hugo refused to let it go. After school, he walked partway home with me, speaking urgently the entire time about how his cousin finally confided in someone and got help, how her situation improved, how mine could too. Autumn leaves crunched rhythmically under our feet, punctuating his pleas. You don't understand, I finally snapped. They already tried to help. It made everything worse. The dam broke. I told him about calling CPS, the social worker's visit, my father's masterful manipulation, and the brute punishment that followed. The words poured out in a torrent after years of suffocating silence. Hugo looked stunned but resolute, his jaw setting in a determined line I hadn't seen before. Then we need better evidence. My mom works at the hospital. She deals with this kind of stuff all the time. She knows what to look for. The thought of another adult knowing of the risk terrified me. No, you can't tell anyone. Promise me, Hugo. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging hard into the sleeve of his jacket. He reluctantly gave his promise, but the troubled look in his eyes told me he was still turning it over in his mind. We parted at the corner and I sprinted home, obsessively checking my watch to ensure I wasn't late. The heavy, gray clouds overhead perfectly mirrored my suffocating dread. That night, my father was in a disturbingly cheerful mood. He brought home pizza, an unprecedented event. The greasy box sat like an alien artifact in the center of our usually austere table. My mother and I exchanged bewildered, uneasy glances. Then, he dropped the bomb with casual menace. I ran into the father of your friend Hugo today, he announced, his eyes locked onto my face, savoring my reaction. Nice guy, works at the bank. We're having them over for dinner this weekend. He took a large bite of pizza, the cheese stretching obscenely between his mouth and the slice. I nearly choked. What? How did you? Small town, son. People know people. He smiled. That familiar, empty smile that never touched his cold eyes. I thought it would be nice for you to have friends over, like normal families do. His heavy emphasis on normal churned my stomach. The message was crystal clear. He controlled everything, even my friendships. Now he was infiltrating Hugo's family, likely to neutralize any help Hugo could offer. I pushed my plate away, the pizza suddenly nauseating. The next day at school, I frantically pulled Hugo aside. You can't come, I insisted, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Tell your parents you're sick something. Hugo looked utterly confused, his forehead creased. Why? Maybe this is good. My parents can see what's happening. I shook my head violently, frustration bubbling over. You don't get it. My dad is really good at seeming normal to other adults. He'll charm your parents completely, and then if you ever try to tell them about me, they won't believe you. I'd witnessed it unfold countless times before, watched adults become utterly charmed by him, but Hugo's parents had already accepted the invitation. They expressed genuine excitement about meeting my family. Hugo pledged he'd attempt to get his mother alone to reveal my bruises, yet I understood it was futile. My father never permitted me unsupervised moments with other adults. He was excessively cautious, obsessively controlling. The dinner was a meticulously orchestrated nightmare disguised as a pleasant family gathering. My dad embodied charm and humor, the consummate host. He delivered jokes that elicited laughter from Hugo's parents, serving drinks with theatrical flair. My mother wore long sleeves concealing her bruises and maintained a fixed smile that surely strained her face. I sat rigidly beside Hugo, barely uttering a word, observing my father effortlessly captivate his parents. The food lodged in my throat, each forced swallow a struggle. Hugo's father, Mr. Campbell, worked at the local bank. His mother, Mrs. Campbell, was indeed a nurse at the hospital, just as Hugo stated. They were pleasant, ordinary people, completely unaware they dined alongside a monster. They complimented our home, thanked my mother for the meal, and treated my father with the deference he commanded from everyone. At one juncture, Hugo tentatively steered the conversation toward child abuse cases Mrs. Campbell encountered professionally. My father smoothly pivoted the topic, then shot me a glare that froze my blood solid. He knew precisely what Hugo attempted. I kicked Hugo sharply under the table, a silent, desperate plea to halt. After dinner, while our parents lingered over coffee in the living room, Hugo and I retreated to my room. "Your dad seems nice," Hugo whispered, his expression deeply confused. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," I hissed back. "That's how he deceives everyone. Just stop. Okay? You're making everything infinitely worse." I paced the cramped space between my bed and desk, incapable of stillness. Hugo looked wounded, his shoulders sagging. "I'm just trying to help." "Well, don't." Fear drove my harshness toward him. Fundamentally, I knew his intentions were pure. Yet all-consuming was the dread of the retribution awaiting me once his family departed. When the Campbells finally left, my father shut the door behind them and turned to me, wearing that same unnerving smile. "Nice family," he remarked, though Hugo seems to possess quite the imagination. His father mentioned he's been sharing some rather concerning tales at home. His tone was casual, but his eyes were flint-hard. My stomach plummeted. Somehow my father had already poisoned the well. He'd successfully painted Hugo as untrustworthy to his own parents. I should have anticipated he'd always be 3 moves ahead. "Go to your room," he commanded. "Your mother and I need to discuss this." His inflection brooked no dissent. I ascended the stairs but crouched at the top, listening. I heard my father informing my mother that Hugo was a detrimental influence, that I was forbidden from seeing him henceforth, and that if she permitted contact, severe consequences would follow. My mother merely acquiesced to every word, her voice faint and utterly broken. I heard the clink of ice cubes in his glass, the familiar creak of his favorite armchair as he settled in for the night. The following day at school, Hugo awaited me at my locker. "My parents think you're making stuff up," he stated, frustration evident. "My dad said your dad told him you've had problems with lying before. Is that true?" His eyes probed mine, seeking truth. Sickness washed over me, the acrid taste of betrayal burning my throat. "No, I mean, yes, that's what they tell people. When I try to get help. See? I told you it wouldn't work." I slammed my locker door shut, the metallic bang reverberating down the hallway. Hugo appeared conflicted, shifting his weight uneasily. "But my mom's a nurse. She'd recognize abuse if she saw it." "Not if she never sees it," I retorted bitterly. "My dad's too clever for that." I turned away, unable to endure the pity clouding his gaze. Over the ensuing weeks, my father methodically dismantled my friendship with Hugo. He informed the school counselor Hugo was a bad influence, formally requesting our separation into different classes. He cultivated a friendship with Hugo's parents, feeding them carefully crafted narratives about my supposed behavioral issues and alleged tendency to fabricate stories for attention. He even insinuated I might require therapy. Every maneuver was coldly calculated, designed to sever my last connection to the outside world. The final crushing blow landed when Hugo's parents discovered texts on his phone where I described my father's abuse. Instead of believing me, they concluded I was a disturbed child, ensnaring their son in my fabricated troubles. They formally forbade Hugo from associating with me. My sole lifeline was severed with ruthless precision. At school, Hugo attempted to maintain our friendship, but it became unsustainable. We couldn't meet after classes, couldn't text without his parents scrutinizing his phone. Gradually, he began spending time with other kids, casting sorrowful glances my way across the cafeteria. I'd watch him laugh with new friends, feeling like I was peering through glass at a life forever out of reach. I was utterly alone again, and my father reveled in it. His victory manifested in his relaxed demeanor at home, less vigilant now that my potential ally was neutralized. My mother retreated further into herself. She drifted through the house like a specter, executing every task flawlessly to evade punishment. Sometimes I'd catch her gazing at me with profound heartbreak, as if words lodged in her throat. Other times, simmering anger radiated from her, as though my attempts to seek help had worsened our plight. The burden of her silent accusation weighed nearly as heavily as my father's violence. One night, I overheard my father speaking to her in their bedroom. "The boy's turning out just like you," he spat, voice thick with revulsion. "Weak, pathetic, can't even keep his mouth shut." The vile words slithered beneath the door. My mother didn't reply, but I heard a heavy thud against the wall, then silence. I fled to my room before he could catch me eavesdropping, heart drumming violently in my ears. The next morning, a fresh bruise bloomed across her cheek, a livid purple stain on her pallid skin. My father blamed me. "Your mother needs structure," he declared, buttering toast with unnerving precision. "When you fail to help me provide that, she suffers. Is that what you want?" I shook my head, drowning in hatred. For him. For my own helplessness. That moment crystallized my resolve. I needed a new plan. If adults wouldn't intervene, I'd save myself. I couldn't endure watching my mother vanish, feeling myself erode daily. I began keeping a journal, concealed beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. I documented everything, dates, times, meticulous descriptions of his atrocities. I knew it might be futile, but it felt like action. Like someday, someone might read it and know. The pen-scratching paper became my quiet rebellion, preserving truths he labored to obliterate. For weeks, I recorded every horror. The time he hurled a plate at my mother because dinner was cold, ceramic shrapnel skittering across the floor. The time he locked me in the pitch-black basement for hours after I forgot to report her extended phone call. The time he forced me to watch him strike her, lecturing. This is what happens to women who disrespect their husbands. Each entry was evidence, a brick at the wall of truth I hoped to build. But I grew careless. One day I left the journal exposed while using the bathroom. Returning, I found my father seated on my bed, reading it. My heart seized. The world stopped. "Interesting stories," he remarked, flipping pages. "Quite the imagination you have." His voice was calm, almost amused. I stood petrified in the doorway as he methodically tore the journal to shreds. "Did you really think this would help?" he asked, scattering the fragments like malevolent confetti. "Who would believe you over me? I'm a respected businessman. You're just a kid with a history of making things up." He rose and advanced toward me. I backed away until the wall stopped me, the cold doorknob jabbing painfully into my spine. "Clean this up," he ordered, gesturing contemptuously at the shredded pages littering the floor. "And if I ever find anything like this again, what happens to your mother will be your fault. Understand?" I nodded mutely, hot tears carving paths down my cheeks. After he finally left, I knelt amidst the wreckage of my journal, hands trembling violently as I gathered the torn fragments. All that meticulous work, all that damning evidence, gone. Kneeling there, surrounded by the shredded remains of my failed bid for justice, hopelessness crushed me heavier than ever before. Yet something stubborn within me refused to surrender. If a physical journal was too dangerous, I needed another method. Something he couldn't locate and annihilate. Something that would force adults to believe me. The next day at lunch, I approached Hugo. We hadn't spoken properly in weeks. "I need to borrow your phone," I whispered urgently. "Just for a day, please." I braced for rejection. Hugo looked startled but nodded. "My parents got me a new one. You can have my old phone. They don't check it anymore." He slipped the device to me under the table, its surface warm from his pocket. "The charger's in my locker. I'll get it to you after class." That night, I concealed the phone deep inside an air vent in my room, meticulously replacing the cover to erase any trace of disturbance. I waited until my parents' heavy breathing confirmed sleep, then crept into my mother's room. With shaking fingers, I photographed her bruises in the dim light while she slept. I pressed the phone against my bedroom wall, capturing audio of my father's venomous rants when he believed no one could hear. I documented everything, my finger quivering each time I pressed the shutter, acutely aware these images held the power to shatter our nightmare. Over the next 2 weeks, my covert operation evolved. Discovering the phone's motion-activated recording feature, I positioned it strategically wherever my father's eruptions were likely. Hidden behind books on the living room shelf during his evening debriefings. Tucked inside an empty cereal box on the kitchen counter before dinner. Secured with tape beneath the dining table during meals. Each night, I retrieved it, reviewing the captured horrors and saving the most incriminating evidence, threats, forced recitations, chilling lessons, into a password-locked folder. I recorded him menacing my mother over an extra $10 at the grocery store, his tone terrifyingly calm as he detailed the pain he'd inflict. I filmed him compelling me to list my mother's failures while she stood trembling in the corner. Most chillingly, I captured him lecturing me. A real man controls his family by knowing everything they do. For 2 weeks, I amassed proof. I was hypervigilant, ensuring my father remained oblivious. I even feigned increased compliance, proactively reporting my mother's minor errors, basking in his rare approval. It sickened me, but I needed his trust. Every act of the good son masked my secret rebellion. Then disaster struck again. My father spotted Hugo and me exchanging brief words during a parent-teacher conference. He remained silent that night, but the next day he visited Hugo's parents, accusing Hugo of stealing money from our house during the dinner. A brazen lie. Yet once again, his facade of respectability worked. Hugo's parents believed him over their own son. Hugo was grounded, his phone access revoked. Our fragile lifeline was severed completely. At school, he refused to meet my eyes. His parents had mandated zero contact. Watching him stride past me in the hallway, gaze fixed rigidly ahead, I felt another shard of hope wither and die. Devastated, I still possessed the phone and its evidence. I just needed to find the right person to entrust with it. The social worker had been easily manipulated. Police might dismiss a kid's word against an adult's. I needed someone impervious to my father's charm or intimidation. Then I remembered Mrs. Cal, my teacher from earlier that year. She'd always been kind, consistently noticing when something was off. She'd once gently questioned a bruise on my arm. Though I'd lied, I couldn't forget the authentic concern in her eyes. Maybe she would help. I approached her after class one afternoon. "Mrs. Cal, can I talk to you about something important?" My voice trembled, my hands clenched into tight fists at my sides to still their shaking. Her expression instantly shifted to concern. "Of course, sweetheart. What's going on?" She cleared a stack of papers from her desk chair, gesturing for me to sit. I took a shaky breath and showed her several photos stored on the phone. Her face paled, one hand flying to cover her mouth. "How long has this been happening?" she asked, her voice hushed with horror. "As long as I can remember," I admitted. "I tried to get help before, but my dad convinced everyone I was lying." The words flowed more easily now, backed by undeniable proof. Mrs. Cal's initial shock solidified into fierce resolve. "Not this time," she stated firmly. "This is clear evidence, but we must be careful. Your father cannot know you came to me." She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand reassuringly. She explained she was a mandated reporter, legally obligated to report suspected abuse, but vowed this would be handled differently. She would contact the original social worker, present the evidence, and ensure multiple authorities were involved, so my father couldn't manipulate a single person. She outlined the plan step by step, ensuring I understood each phase. For the first time in months, a fragile glimmer of hope ignited within me. Mrs. Cal kept the phone for safekeeping and instructed me to act completely normal at home. "Don't give your father any reason to suspect anything," she warned urgently. "We'll move quickly, but carefully." That week crawled by, each day an agonizing eternity. I returned home, played my assigned role, reported my mother's minor infractions and feigned normalcy. My father seemed pleased by my apparent compliance, even permitting me to watch TV beside him one evening. An unprecedented privilege. I sat rigidly on the couch, every muscle coiled tight, silently counting down the hours until Friday. Then, on Friday, Mrs. Cal pulled me aside after the final bell. "It's happening tonight," she whispered, her eyes scanning the emptying hallway. "The social worker's coming with a police officer and a child advocate. They'll be there at 7 o'clock. Just stay calm and tell the truth." I nodded, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of terror and fragile hope. This was our final chance. If it failed now, I couldn't fathom our fate. But for the first time, I allowed myself to envision a different life. One where my mother and I could breathe freely, unshackled from constant fear, where safety wasn't a desperate fantasy. I walked home that Friday with my stomach twisted into painful knots. Each step toward the house felt like inching toward a precipice. I compulsively checked the school clock, calculating the dwindling hours until 7 p.m. The crushing weight of the impending confrontation made normal breathing a struggle. My father was inexplicably cheerful when I arrived, amplifying my dread. He whistled tunelessly in the kitchen while assembling a sandwich. My mother mechanically folded laundry nearby, her eyes fixed blankly on the garments as if they held encrypted messages. Fresh bruises mottled her wrists, visible beneath her sleeves when she reached for another shirt. "Hey, sport," my dad called out, his voice unnervingly buoyant. He took a large bite, mayonnaise clinging to the corner of his mouth. "How was school?" "Fine," I mumbled, dropping my backpack heavily near the stairs. I fought to appear unaffected, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Just normal stuff." He nodded, seemingly appeased. "Your mom's making pot roast tonight, your favorite." He winked conspiratorially, projecting the illusion of a normal father-son bond. I forced a thin smile and fled upstairs to my room, counting each step. 7 hours until they arrive. 7 hours of the performance. I sat at my desk, staring unseeingly at math homework. The numbers blurred into meaningless symbols. Around 6:30, my father's phone rang downstairs. He answered it in the living room, his voice drifting upward. It sounded like a work issue, a problem demanding his immediate attention. I held my breath, scarcely daring to hope. Then came the crucial words. "Fine, I'll come in, but I won't stay long." His heavy footsteps stomped toward the front door. "I'll be back in an hour. Dinner better be ready." The door slammed. Seconds later, the roar of his car engine erupted in the driveway. I sprinted to the window, pressing my face against the glass, watching his taillights vanish into the dusk. I couldn't believe our incredible luck. Mrs. Cal must have orchestrated this, arranging his absence just before the authorities arrived. I bolted downstairs to find my mother. She stood in the kitchen, checking the pot roast in the oven. "Mom," I urged, my voice tight with desperation. "Someone's coming to help us. At 7 o'clock tonight, social workers and police." Her face blanched. The oven mitt slipped from her grasp, hitting the floor with a muffled thud. "No," she breathed, her voice cracking. "No, no, no. You know what happened last time. You know what he'll do to us." I seized her hands, forcing her to meet my eyes. "It's different now. I have proof. Real evidence he can't talk his way out of." I recounted the phone, the photos, the audio recordings. Her eyes widened with each revelation. "He'll kill us," she whispered. But beneath the terror, I glimpsed it, a fragile spark of hope flickering to life. "No, he won't," I asserted, projecting a confidence I didn't fully feel. "Not this time." At precisely 7 p.m., the doorbell chimed. My mother froze, knuckles bone white as she gripped the countertop. I drew a steadying breath and opened the door. Standing on our porch was Miss Deborah, the same social worker from before. But this time, she wasn't alone. A police officer flanked her, alongside a woman who introduced herself as Salem, a child advocate. Parked discreetly across the street, I spotted Mrs. Cal in her car, watching. She offered me a subtle, encouraging nod. "Hello again," Miss Deborah said, her expression grave. "May we come in?" I nodded mutely, stepping aside. My mother materialized in the hallway, trembling uncontrollably. The social worker's gaze instantly locked onto the bruises now fully visible on her wrists. "Mrs. Johnson," she said gently, "we need to talk." The next hour unfolded with suffocating intensity. We gathered in the living room as I presented the photos and played the damning recordings. My mother wept silently, tears tracing paths down her cheeks while the evidence of our torment filled the room. Officer Drew took meticulous notes, his questions calm and deliberate. Salem sat beside me on the couch, her hand occasionally resting reassuringly on my shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me the truth last time?" Miss Deborah asked my mother, her tone firm yet compassionate. My mother stared at her own hands. "He said he'd take my son away, said no one would believe me anyway." Her voice was a fragile thread. "And he was right. You didn't." Miss Deborah's face contorted with genuine remorse. "I made a mistake," she admitted, "but we're here now, and we won't leave until you're both safe." Just as Officer Drew began outlining next steps, we heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a car door. My father was back early. My blood turned to ice. "He's home," I whispered, panic constrict my throat. Officer Drew instantly rose, positioning himself protectively between us and the entrance. "Stay calm," he instructed. "Let me handle this." The front door swung open. My father stepped inside and froze at the sight of strangers occupying his living room. Confusion flashed across his face for a split second. Then his eyes locked onto me, and understanding dawned. His expression hardened into something terrifying. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice unnervingly controlled. He glared at my mother. "What did you do?" Before she could respond, Officer Drew stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Officer Drew with the county police. We're here investigating reports of domestic abuse." Instantly, my father's face transformed, the rage vanishing, replaced by a mask of concerned bewilderment. It was the same seamless performance I'd witnessed 100 times before. "There must be some misunderstanding," he protested, his voice smooth and unnervingly reasonable. "My son has a documented history of fabricating stories for attention." "I don't have a therapist," I blurted out, my voice trembling but resolute. "That's just another lie?" My father's eyes flashed with pure fury before he wrestled his expression back under control. "See what I mean? The boy clearly needs professional intervention." Officer Drew remained impassive. "Sir, we possess photographic evidence and audio recordings that contradict your account." For the first time ever, genuine fear flickered across my father's face. He hadn't anticipated this. He was accustomed to being believed, to charming his way free. But photos couldn't be deceived. Recordings couldn't be swayed by a disarming smile or a plausible excuse. "I demand to see this so-called evidence," he insisted, taking an aggressive step forward. Officer Drew held up a warning hand. "Sir, remain where you are." My father ignored him, advancing toward me with predatory intent. "What did you do?" he hissed. the polished facade crumbling. What did you tell them? Officer Drew moved swiftly, blocking his path. Sir, step back now. Instead, my father lunged, hand outstretched to grab me. You ungrateful little... He never finished. Officer Drew restrained him firmly and professionally. My father thrashed, face twisted with primal rage. This is absurd. I'm a respected community member. You can't... Ronald Johnson, Officer Drew stated formally, securing handcuffs around his wrists. You're under arrest for domestic assault and child endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. As they led him out, he bellowed threats. How we'd regret this, how no one would believe us, how he'd return. But his words rang hollow now, stripped of power by the irrefutable proof we held. Once the door closed behind him, the house felt transformed, lighter, as if a suffocating storm cloud had finally lifted. My mother sat shell-shocked on the couch. Salem gently outlined the next steps. Emergency protective orders, secure temporary housing, counseling services. It was overwhelming, yet for the first time, it felt like pathways to safety existed. Miss Deborah knelt before my mother. I'm profoundly sorry I failed to see the truth before, she said, her voice thick with regret. But I swear we'll protect you both this time. My mother nodded, tears still flowing freely down her face. But these tears were different, not born of terror or agony, but of profound, disbelieving relief. That night, we packed essential belongings and were taken to a safe house, a modest apartment in a secured building across town. Nothing luxurious, basic beds, a functional kitchen, a small living room with a worn couch. Yet it was the first space I'd ever inhabited without the oppressive shadow of my father darkening every corner. The following weeks blurred into meetings, legal paperwork, and court hearings. My father hired an expensive attorney who aggressively painted me as disturbed and my mother as unstable, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the audio recordings, the meticulous documented pattern of abuse. Together, they wove a narrative too damning to be dismantled by words. Hugo and his parents visited us at the safe house. Seeing the evidence firsthand, they were visibly horrified. Hugo's father repeatedly apologized for doubting me, for letting my father manipulate them. I harbored no blame. My father had deceived everyone for years. I knew something was wrong, Hugo declared, giving my shoulder a light punch. Told you my mom would help once she saw real proof. True to his word, his mother, a nurse, had assisted in forensically documenting my mother's injuries for the court case. School felt surreal initially. Rumors swirled, as they inevitably do in small towns. Some classmates avoided me, unsure how to react. Others suddenly sought my friendship, drawn by the notoriety. I mostly stayed close to Hugo, profoundly grateful for the one friend who'd stood by me when it was hardest. Mrs. Cal checked on me regularly, sometimes arriving with cookies or books she believed I might enjoy. I'm proud of you, she told me firmly one afternoon after class. What you did took incredible courage. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what I had to do. That's exactly what courage is, she replied simply. The court awarded my mother full custody and imposed a permanent restraining order against my father, prohibiting him from coming within 500 feet of either of us. He ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial, sparing us the trauma of testifying in open court. Part of me felt relief, but another part yearned for the world to hear, in detail, the horrors he'd inflicted. When my father received his 2-year sentence, my feelings tangled. On one hand, it felt woefully inadequate for the years of terror. The prosecutor clarified that with the plea deal and good behavior, he might serve barely a year. Yet, knowing he was imprisoned, even temporarily, granted us vital breathing room to begin healing. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched him led away in handcuffs. He never glanced back at us, and I realized it was the first time I'd ever seen him stripped completely of power over our lives. That night, I wept, not for him, but for all the stolen years. My mother began therapy and joined a support group for domestic violence survivors. Gradually, I witnessed her transformation. She stood taller, spoke with more volume, made decisions without instinctively seeking approval. She even secured a job at a local bookstore, something my father would have forbidden utterly. I started therapy too. It felt awkward initially. I was unused to discussing feelings or admitting pain. My therapist, Dr. Natalie, was patient. She explained recovery wasn't linear. Some days would feel like setbacks. She was right. Some nights I still woke drenched in cold sweat, certain I heard his footsteps on phantom stairs. Some days I caught myself scanning my mother for bruises that no longer existed. Old habits died hard. 3 months after our escape, my mom and I moved into our own apartment. It was small but filled with light from windows that actually welcomed sunshine. My mom painted the living room a bright, defiant yellow, a color my father would have despised. I chose sky blue for my bedroom walls. We furnished it with mismatched secondhand pieces and hung pictures haphazardly, delighting in the freedom of imperfection. One evening, I found my mom sitting on our tiny balcony, gazing at the stars. I joined her, and she wrapped an arm around me. "Are you okay?" I asked, a question I now asked often, half expecting the old evasions. She smiled, a genuine warmth reaching her eyes. "Not completely, not yet. But I'm getting there." She squeezed my shoulder. "We both are." And she was right. We were healing, day by day. Hard days still came, moments when the past felt suffocatingly near. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to come home. For the first time, it truly felt like home. My father ultimately received a 2-year sentence, likely shortened by good behavior. Sometimes I worried about his eventual release, but my mother reminded me we were stronger now. We had support systems, documented evidence, and, most crucially, each other. Last week, Hugo came over for a sleepover. We stayed up late playing video games and gorging on junk food, utterly normal kid stuff. When his mom called to check in, I heard him say everything was fine. Just a regular night at a friend's house. Nothing extraordinary, except it was extraordinary to me. Every mundane moment felt miraculous after years of walking on eggshells. Every boring, normal day was a victory. I'm 13 now. Sometimes it's jarring to recall that just a year ago, I believed abuse was normal, that I thought families were supposed to hurt each other. Now I know better. Now I know what home is supposed to feel like. Safe.